The dust had barely settled when Owen Quade heard the scream cut short beneath the rumble of falling rock, and he spurred his horse toward the canyon wall without a second thought, knowing that someone was trapped under those tons of stone and earth. His mare skidded to a halt at the base of the slide, and Owen was off her back before she had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground hard as his eyes scanned the devastation. The late afternoon sun of June, 1878 beat down on the Oregon Trail just outside Oregon City, Oregon, where freight wagons and travelers had been making their way west for decades. This particular stretch had always been treacherous, hugging the canyon walls where the spring melt could loosen rocks, but this was early summer, and there should not have been a slide at all. "Help!" The voice was muffled, desperate, coming from beneath a section where smaller rocks had tumbled. "Please, somebody." Owen dropped to his knees, his hands already moving, tossing aside stones that cut his palms. "I hear you. Keep talking so I can find you. I cannot breathe." The voice was distinctly feminine, young, panicked. "Please hurry." "I am going to get you out of here," Owen said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. He had seen men die under rockslides before, had pulled out bodies instead of living souls, but he refused to let that happen today. "What is your name?" "Flora," she gasped. "Flora Sterling." "My wagon, it overturned when the rocks started falling." "I tried to run, but save your strength," Owen commanded, moving larger rocks now, creating a systematic path toward where her voice originated. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he did not stop. Could not stop. "Flora, can you move your legs?" "I think so. My left arm is pinned." That was both good and terrible news. If she could feel her legs, her spine was likely intact, but a pinned limb meant he would have to be extraordinarily careful not to cause a secondary collapse. Owen looked around quickly, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of a man who had spent 32 years surviving in rough country. The main mass of the slide was stable for now, but the smaller debris field where Flora was trapped could shift at any moment. "Flora, listen to me carefully. I am going to clear the rocks around you, but you need to stay as still as possible. Do not try to pull your arm free until I tell you. Understood?" "Yes." Her voice was weaker now, and that terrified him more than he cared to admit. Owen worked with methodical precision, his powerful shoulders and arms moving rock after rock, creating a small clearing. His hands were bleeding freely now, the skin torn and raw, but he barely noticed. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, he caught sight of dark hair matted with dust, and then a pale face streaked with dirt and blood. "There you are," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with relief. "I see you now." Flora's eyes fluttered open, and even through the grime and fear, Owen was struck by how green they were, like new leaves in springtime. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with delicate features now twisted in pain. But there was something else in her expression too, something that looked like hope. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came." Owen positioned himself carefully, examining the rocks that held her left arm. A large boulder rested against a wedged formation of smaller stones, and her arm was caught between them. If he moved the wrong rock, the whole thing could shift and crush her completely. "This is going to hurt when I free you. Are you ready? Do I have a choice?" Despite everything, there was a trace of humor in her voice, and Owen found himself almost smiling. "Not really, no." He braced his back against the canyon wall, planted his feet, and gripped the boulder. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Owen threw all his strength into the effort, muscles screaming as he shifted the boulder just enough. Flora cried out, but she was already pulling her arm free, and then Owen was grabbing her around the waist and hauling her backwards, away from the debris field. They collapsed together 20 feet from the slide, both breathing hard, both covered in dust and blood. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Owen asked, already checking her over with efficient movements, looking for breaks or serious bleeding. "My arm," Flora said through clenched teeth. "And my ribs. I think something is wrong with my ribs." Owen carefully felt along her left side and she hissed in pain. "Probably cracked, maybe broken. We need to get you to a doctor." He looked back at the slide and spotted the remains of what must have been her wagon, completely demolished under several tons of rock. "Were you traveling alone?" "My aunt was with me," Flora said, and her eyes filled with tears. "She was driving the wagon. When the rocks started falling, she pushed me and I rolled away, but she—" Her voice broke. Owen followed her gaze and saw what she had already known. A woman's hand, pale and still, protruded from beneath the largest boulder. There was no way anyone under that much rock could have survived. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest for a moment of respect. "I am sorry," he said quietly. Flora closed her eyes, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "She saved my life, and we will honor that by making sure you survive." Owen stood, wincing as his own bruised muscles protested, and carefully lifted Flora into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and he carried her to his mare with practiced ease. "Oregon City is about 5 miles back. Can you ride?" "I will manage," Flora said, though her face was pale with pain and shock. Owen mounted first, then pulled her up in front of him, settling her carefully against his chest so that her injured arm and ribs were protected. She fit there perfectly, he noticed with a strange jolt, as if she had been made to rest against his heart. He told himself it was just the adrenaline talking, the relief of having saved a life, nothing more. The ride to Oregon City was slow and careful, with Owen supporting Flora the entire way. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time she started to slip, he would talk to her, keeping her present. "Tell me about your aunt," he said. "What was her name?" "Margaret," Flora murmured. "Margaret Sterling. She was my father's sister. My parents died of fever 2 years ago in Kansas, and she came to get me. We were traveling to Oregon City to start fresh. She had a little money saved, and we were going to open a dress shop." "That sounds like a fine dream." "It was her dream," Flora said softly. "I just wanted to feel safe again, to have a home." Owen tightened his arm around her carefully. "You will, I promise you that." By the time they reached Oregon City, dusk was falling and the main street was lit with oil lamps. Owen rode straight to Doc Peterson's house, calling out before he had even dismounted. The old physician appeared on his porch, took one look at the situation, and immediately ushered them inside. "Rockslide victim," Owen explained as he carried Flora into the examination room. "Trapped for probably half an hour. Left arm was pinned, possible broken ribs, definite shock. Set her down here, gently now," Doc Peterson directed, clearing his table. He was a gruff man in his 60s with skilled hands and a reputation for saving lives that others would have given up on. "You can wait outside, Owen." "No," Flora said suddenly, her hand gripping Owen's shirt with surprising strength. "Please stay." Owen looked at Doc Peterson, who shrugged. "If it keeps her calm, you can stay, but you will have to help hold her still when I set anything that needs setting." The examination was thorough and painful, and Owen found himself holding Flora's good hand while Doc Peterson worked. Her grip was fierce, and twice she buried her face against Owen's chest when the pain became too much, but she did not cry out. That took a kind of strength that Owen deeply respected. 2 cracked ribs, not broken through, thank the Lord, Doc Peterson finally announced. Her arm is badly bruised and the shoulder was partially dislocated, but I have put it back in place. She will need to keep it in a sling for several weeks. The rest is cuts, bruises, and shock. She is a lucky young woman." "My aunt was not so lucky," Flora said quietly. Doc Peterson's face softened. "I am sorry for your loss, miss." "Owen, you said there was a fatality. The woman driving the wagon. She is still under the rocks. I will ride out with some men tomorrow to recover her body for proper burial." "I want to be there," Flora said, "for the funeral." "You need to rest," Doc Peterson insisted. "You have been through a terrible ordeal." "I will rest after I have said goodbye to my aunt." Flora's voice was steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "She deserves that much from me." Owen admired her determination even as he worried about her condition. "We will make sure you are there," he promised. Doc Peterson looked between them with knowing eyes but said nothing beyond giving instructions for Flora's care. "She needs to stay somewhere she can be monitored tonight. Do you have family in town, miss?" Flora shook her head. "Aunt Margaret was my only family. We were going to stay at the boarding house until we found a place to rent." "Mrs. Hutchins runs a decent boarding house on 3rd Street, Owen said. "I will take Flora there and speak to the widow about her situation." "Actually," Doc Peterson interjected, "given her condition, I would prefer she stay somewhere she can be checked on regularly tonight. My wife can prepare our spare room. It is no trouble." But Flora was already shaking her head before he finished speaking. "You have been too kind already, doctor. I cannot impose further, and I have a little money. I can pay for a room." "The doctor is right about you needing supervision," Owen said firmly, "but I have another suggestion. My sister Ruth lives just outside town with her husband and 3 children. She is a fine woman, a skilled nurse in her own right, and I know she would welcome you. Their home is large and they often take in people who need help." Flora looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, and Owen saw the war between pride and practicality playing out across her expressive face. Finally, she nodded. "If you are certain it would not be an imposition." "I am certain." Owen was already mentally composing what he would say to Ruth, how he would explain the strange protective instinct that had taken hold of him the moment he heard Flora's voice beneath those rocks. Doc Peterson bandaged the worst of Owen's torn hands and refused payment for treating Flora. "You saved her life, Owen. That is payment enough. But you bring her back day after tomorrow so I can check those ribs." Owen helped Flora onto his horse again, and this time she leaned back against him without hesitation, exhausted beyond the ability to maintain proper distance. He could feel the heat of her despite the cooling evening air, could smell the dust and blood and something underneath that was purely her, something that made his heart beat faster. The ride to Ruth's farm took 30 minutes in the dark, and by the time they arrived, Flora was asleep against him, her breathing shallow but steady. Ruth must have heard the hoofbeats because she appeared in the doorway with a lamp, her pretty face creased with concern. "Owen, what has happened?" "Ruth, I need your help." Owen dismounted carefully, lifting Flora down and cradling her against his chest. "This is Flora Sterling. She was caught in a rockslide today, and she has nowhere else to go." Ruth took one look at the unconscious woman in her brother's arms and immediately stepped aside. "Bring her to the guest room. I will fetch water and bandages. James," she called to her husband. "Come help Owen." James Brennan appeared, a solid man with a carpenter's build and a kind face. He took in the situation without needing explanation and led the way to a small, neat room at the back of the house. Owen laid Flora on the bed as gently as he could, and she stirred slightly, her eyes opening in confusion. "Where am I?" "My sister's home," Owen said softly, brushing a strand of dark hair from her forehead before he could stop himself. "You are safe here. Ruth will take care of you. You are leaving." There was something close to panic in Flora's voice. "Just to the barn. I will be here in the morning, I promise." Owen did not understand the fierce need he felt to reassure her, only that he could not bear the fear in her eyes. Ruth bustled in with warm water and clean cloths, her maternal instincts fully engaged. "Let me help you out of these ruined clothes, dear, and into something clean." "Owen, James, out with you both." Owen reluctantly left the room, following James to the kitchen where Ruth's oldest son, a boy of 9, was peering around the corner with wide eyes. "Who is that lady, Uncle Owen?" "Someone who needed help, Matthew. Now off to bed with you." James poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Owen. "You want to talk about it?" Owen downed half the glass, feeling the burn, welcoming it. "I pulled her out of a rockslide. Her aunt died. She has no one. And you brought her here instead of to the boarding house or the doctor's home because..." Owen stopped, unsure how to explain what he did not fully understand himself. "I just needed to know she would be safe, properly safe." James studied him over the rim of his glass, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ruth is going to have thoughts about this. Ruth always has thoughts about everything. True enough. But this time I suspect her thoughts might actually be correct." Owen did not ask what his brother-in-law meant. He finished his whiskey and excused himself to the barn, where he bedded down in the hay as he had done countless times before. But sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Flora's face beneath that rock, heard the desperation in her voice, felt the terrifying possibility that he might not reach her in time. He had saved lives before. It was what you did in rough country. You helped people when they needed it. But this felt different. This felt like his own life had shifted somehow, like the ground beneath his feet was no longer quite as solid as it had been that morning. Morning came with the crow of roosters and the sound of children's laughter. Owen washed at the pump, changed into the spare clothes he kept at Ruth's place, and entered the farmhouse kitchen to find his sister making breakfast while Flora sat at the table, pale but upright, wearing one of Ruth's simple cotton dresses. Her left arm was in the sling, and there were fresh bandages visible at her collar and on her right hand, but her hair had been washed and braided, and she looked more like a person and less like a disaster victim. "Good morning," Owen said, and hated how uncertain he sounded. Flora looked up and a genuine smile crossed her face, transforming it from merely pretty to something that made Owen's breath catch. "Good morning. I wanted to thank you properly, for yesterday, for everything. You do not need to thank me. I do. You saved my life, and then you brought me somewhere safe when you could have just left me at the doctor's office. That means something." Ruth set plates of eggs and biscuits on the table with perhaps more force than necessary. "Sit down, Owen, before the food gets cold. Flora and I have been talking this morning about her situation." Owen sat, noting the stubborn set to his sister's jaw that meant she had already made decisions and would brook no argument. What situation would that be? The situation where she is alone in a strange town with no family, limited funds, and injuries that will prevent her from working for several weeks. Ruth folded her arms. "I have invited her to stay here with us until she is healed and can decide what she wants to do next." "I cannot accept such generosity," Flora protested, though her voice was weak. "You do not even know me. We know you survived a rockslide and still have the strength to be polite about it," James said, coming in from the morning chores with Matthew and his younger siblings in tow. "That is good enough for us. Besides, Ruth has been wanting another woman around to talk to. I am not much for discussing dress patterns." The children surrounded the table, curious about their guest, and Flora's expression softened as the youngest, a girl of 4, climbed into her lap carefully, having been warned about Flora's injuries. "You are very pretty," the little girl declared. "Are you going to marry Uncle Owen?" Flora choked on the water she had been drinking, and Owen felt his face heat in a way it had not since he was a boy. Ruth looked entirely too pleased with her daughter's question. "Emma, that is not a polite question to ask," James said, but he was grinning. "Why not?" "Matthew heard Mama tell Papa that Uncle Owen looked at the lady like he wanted to marry her. So I just thought, Emma, eat your breakfast." Ruth interrupted firmly, shooting her husband a look that promised a discussion later. The meal continued in relative peace after that, though Owen was acutely aware of Flora's presence across the table, of the way she smiled at the children's chatter and helped Emma cut her biscuit with her one good hand. She fit here, he realized. In his sister's kitchen, with his nephew and nieces, in this life of simple farming and family. And God help him, he wanted her to fit into his life too. After breakfast, Owen prepared to ride back to the Rockslide site with several men from town to recover Margaret Sterling's body. Flora insisted on walking out to the porch despite Ruth's protests. "I meant what I said last night," she told Owen quietly. "I want to be at the funeral. It will likely be tomorrow or the day after, depending on what we find. Are you certain you are up for it?" Flora's jaw set in a way that reminded Owen of his sister. "She was my family. I will be there." Owen nodded, respecting her determination. "Then I will come get you when it is time." He hesitated, then added, "Flora, you are safe here. You know that, right? Whatever you decide to do, wherever you decide to go, you have time to heal first." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Flora asked suddenly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Owen thought about that, about the real answer versus the safe answer. He decided on the truth. "Because when I heard your voice under those rocks, something in me could not bear the thought of losing you. I know that does not make sense. I know we just met. But it is the truth." Flora stared at him, her green eyes wide and searching. "That is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." "I do not know how to be anything but honest." "Then I will be honest too. I am terrified. Of being alone, of what comes next, of the fact that my aunt is gone, and I do not know how to be in this world without someone to tell me what to do. But when I am near you, the fear is not quite so loud." Owen reached out, hesitated, then gently took her good hand in his bandaged one. "Then I will stay close until you do not need me anymore. What if I need you for a long time? Then I guess I will be around for a long time." They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, something passing between them that had no name yet but felt significant all the same. Then Ruth's voice called from inside, and the moment broke, but not entirely. It was still there, hovering between them, a promise of something that might grow if given the chance. Owen rode out with 5 men from town, and they spent the day carefully excavating Margaret Sterling's body from the rockslide. It was grim work, made worse by the June heat and the knowledge that they were recovering someone's beloved family member. They found her still in the driver's seat of the wagon, her body broken but her face peaceful, as if she had not suffered in the end. Owen wrapped her carefully in canvas and led the somber procession back to Oregon City, where the undertaker took charge of preparing her for burial. The funeral was held 2 days later at the small church on the edge of town. Flora attended despite her injuries, wearing a black dress that Ruth had quickly altered to fit her. She stood straight and strong through the service, though Owen could see the pain in every line of her body. He stayed beside her, offering silent support, and when the first shovelful of earth hit the coffin and Flora finally broke, he was there to catch her. "She should not have died for me," Flora sobbed against his chest. "It should have been me." "No," Owen said fiercely, holding her carefully so as not to hurt her ribs. "Do not ever say that. She made a choice to save you because she loved you. Honor that choice by living, Flora. Live the life she wanted you to have. I do not know how. Then we will figure it out together." People came by after the burial to offer condolences, and Owen learned more about Flora in those brief conversations. She had trained as a seamstress in Kansas, had a gift for delicate work, had been looking forward to helping her aunt with the dress shop. She was 21 years old, had no other living family, and had dreams of creating beautiful things that would make women feel special. As the crowd dispersed, and they walked back to where James had the wagon waiting, Flora said quietly, "I should look at what can be salvaged from the wagon." My aunt had the money for the shop in a strongbox, and there were some of my parents' things, photographs and my mother's wedding ring. "If they survived the slide, we can go tomorrow," Owen promised. "I will take you out there myself." The next day dawned clear and warm, and Owen borrowed James's wagon to take Flora back to the Rockslide site. Ruth packed them a lunch and gave Owen a significant look that he chose to ignore. The ride out was quiet, with Flora lost in thought and Owen content to simply be near her, to watch the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair and brought out the paleness of her skin. When they reached the site, Flora inhaled sharply at the devastation. The wagon was completely destroyed, but Owen had already been through the wreckage with some of the men who helped with the recovery. He led Flora to a pile of items they had carefully collected and protected from the elements. "We found the strongbox," Owen said. "It is dented but intact." The lock held. Flora opened it with shaking hands, and her expression crumpled with relief when she saw the cash and important papers inside were undamaged. "Oh, thank God! This was everything we had. If it had been lost, it was not lost." Owen handed her a smaller bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "We also found this. I thought it might be important." Inside the oilcloth were photographs in frames, miraculously unbroken, and a small wooden box. Flora opened the box and pulled out a delicate gold ring with a tiny diamond. "My mother's ring," she whispered. "Papa put it on her finger when they married in a little church in Boston. She wore it every day until she died, and then Aunt Margaret kept it safe for me." She slipped it onto her right hand since her left arm was still in the sling, and it fit perfectly. They sat there together among the ruins of Flora's old life, and Owen found himself talking in a way he rarely did. He told her about growing up in Oregon, about losing his parents to a harsh winter when he was 17, and Ruth was just 13, about raising his sister while working any job he could find. He talked about learning to cowboy on the big ranches, about the years spent drifting before he finally saved enough to buy his own small spread just north of Oregon City. "I have 80 acres and a decent herd," he said. "It is not much, but it is mine. I built a cabin last year, planning to have a real home base instead of always staying in Ruth's barn or in bunkhouses. But it is just me there, and sometimes the quiet gets loud, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," Flora said softly. "Loneliness is the loudest sound there is." Their eyes met, and Owen saw his own longing reflected in her gaze. It was too soon, he knew that. She was grieving and hurt and vulnerable. But the connection between them was undeniable, something that had sparked to life in the moment he first heard her voice beneath the rocks and had been growing steadily every hour since. "Flora," he started, then hesitated. "I know this is not the right time. I know you need time to heal, to grieve, to figure out what you want to do with your life. But I want you to know that I am here, for whatever you need, for as long as you need." Flora reached out with her good hand and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. "You are a good man, Owen Quade, the best man I have ever met. I am just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. No, you are more than that. You are someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it, someone who keeps his promises. Someone who makes me feel safe in a world that has been anything but safe for a very long time." Owen turned his face to press a kiss to her palm, unable to help himself. "Then stay," he said. "Stay in Oregon City. Stay at Ruth's for as long as you need, and when you are ready, let me court you properly. Let me show you that not everything in life has to be hard and frightening." "I have almost no money, no prospects, no family," Flora said, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "What do I have to offer you? Yourself. That is all I want." Flora was quiet for a long moment, and Owen braced himself for rejection, for the sensible response that they barely knew each other, that this was foolish and rushed. But then she smiled, really smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." The weeks that followed were some of the best of Owen's life. He visited Ruth's farm every day, often staying for supper, and slowly, carefully, he courted Flora Sterling. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows near his ranch. He took her on careful walks when Doc Peterson said she could start moving around more. He sat with her on the porch while she worked on sewing projects one-handed, practicing the skills that would eventually let her earn a living. Ruth watched it all with barely concealed delight, and James frequently teased Owen about the lovesick expression he wore whenever Flora was near. But Owen did not care. For the first time in his adult life, he could imagine a future that involved more than just surviving, more than working himself to exhaustion and falling into bed alone each night. Flora healed quickly under Ruth's attentive care and Doc Peterson's supervision. Her ribs mended, her arm regained its strength, and the cuts and bruises faded to nothing. But more than her physical recovery, Owen watched her spirit return. She laughed at the children's antics, helped Ruth with cooking and mending, and slowly began to talk about what she wanted to do. "I still want to open a dress shop," she confessed one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. It had been 6 weeks since the Rockslide, and Flora was nearly back to full health. "Aunt Margaret had so many beautiful ideas, and I think I could make it work. There are enough women in Oregon City who want nice things, who want to feel special. I could do that for them." "Then you should," Owen said simply. "You have the money from the strongbox, and there is a space on Main Street that has been empty for months. Old man Kerrigan owns it, and he would probably rent it cheap to the right person." Flora turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "You would not mind. If I was running a business, being independent, why would I mind? You have a skill and a dream. I would be a fool to stand in the way of that." Owen took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. "Flora, I am courting you because I want a partner, not a decoration. I want someone who has their own life, their own purpose. That is what makes a real marriage, seems to me." "Marriage?" Flora's voice was soft. "We have not talked about marriage." "Maybe we should," Owen said, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I know by all reasonable standards we should wait longer. But I knew when I was pulling you out from under those rocks that you were important, and every day since has just confirmed it. I love you, Flora Sterling. I want to marry you, build a life with you, wake up next to you for the rest of my days." Flora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when you promised to get me out from under the rocks, and I have been falling ever since. Yes, Owen. Yes, I will marry you." Owen pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, gentle and careful and full of promise. It was not a passionate kiss, not yet, but it held everything they were building together, all the hope and trust and affection that had grown between them. They were married in early August at the same church where they had buried Aunt Margaret. Ruth cried through the entire ceremony, and even James had to wipe his eyes when Owen slipped a simple gold band onto Flora's finger next to her mother's ring. The children threw wildflowers, and half the town turned out to celebrate, having heard the romantic story of the cowboy who saved the seamstress from the rockslide. Flora moved into Owen's cabin, and together they made it a home. She set up a sewing area in the corner of the main room where the light was best, and began taking in work while also planning for her shop. Owen added a second room to the cabin, thinking ahead to the children they would have, and Flora planted a garden that thrived in the rich Oregon soil. In September, Flora signed a lease on the space on Main Street and began transforming it into Sterling's fine dresses and alterations. Owen helped her build the fitting rooms and display counters, and Ruth donated fabric she had been hoarding for years. When the shop opened in October, Flora had already lined up 5 commissions for winter dresses, and word spread quickly about her skill with delicate work. The business grew steadily through the fall and into winter. Flora hired a young woman to help with the simpler alterations, and soon she was designing custom pieces for the wealthier women in town. Owen was endlessly proud of her, watching her confidence grow along with her success. Their first Christmas together was simple but perfect. They had dinner at Ruth's with the whole family, and Owen gave Flora a beautiful sewing box he had commissioned from James, made of polished oak with her initials carved into the lid. Flora gave Owen a new winter coat she had made herself, fitted perfectly to his broad shoulders, lined with soft wool. "I never want you to be cold," she said as he tried it on. "Not when you are out checking the herd in the winter storms." "I am never cold when I know I get to come home to you," Owen replied, pulling her into his arms. In January, Flora told Owen she was pregnant, and the joy on his face made her laugh and cry at the same time. "I was hoping you would be happy," she said. "I know we have not been married long. I am more than happy. I am thrilled. We are going to have a family, Flora, a real family." "We already have a real family," she pointed out. "We have each other." "True enough. But now we get to add to it." Their son was born in September of 1879, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him William, after Owen's father, and he was doted on by everyone who met him. Ruth's children treated him like a living doll, and Owen discovered depths of love he had not known were possible. Flora managed to keep the shop running through her pregnancy and after William's birth, hiring another seamstress to help when she needed to be home with the baby. The business continued to thrive, and by William's first birthday, Flora had saved enough to buy the building outright rather than continuing to rent. "We are doing well," she told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their son toddle around the yard. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We are," Owen agreed. "Sometimes I think about that day, about the Rockslide, about how close I came to losing you before I ever really found you. But you did not lose me. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me a life, Owen. A home, a family, a purpose. Everything I have, everything I am now started the moment you promised to get me out from under those rocks. And I would do it again. Every single time. In every possible version of our lives, I would find you and save you and love you." Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Flora's aunt, was born in 1881. She had Owen's stubbornness and Flora's delicate features, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. William adored his little sister, and the cabin rang with the sounds of children's laughter. Owen expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land and building up his herd, until he had one of the most successful small operations in the area. He never wanted to be one of the massive ranchers, preferring to keep things at a scale where he knew every animal and could still spend evenings at home with his family. Flora's shop became an institution in Oregon City. She trained several young women in the art of dressmaking, giving them a trade and a way to support themselves. She never forgot what it felt like to be alone and afraid, and she made sure that any woman who came to her in need left with more than just a dress. On their 5th anniversary, Owen and Flora stood at the site of the old Rockslide. Nature had softened the scar over the years, wildflowers growing among the rocks, grass covering the disturbed earth. But the place still held meaning for them, the spot where their story had begun. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Flora asked, holding Owen's hand while their children played nearby under Ruth's watchful eye. "If you had not been riding by that day, if you had been even a few minutes later—" "I try not to," Owen admitted. "It is too frightening to think about. But I also believe that somehow, some way, we would have found each other. Maybe not that day, maybe not that way, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be." Flora smiled and reached up to kiss him, this man who had saved her life and then taught her how to truly live it. "I like that thought, that we were always going to find each other." "Always," Owen agreed. "In every lifetime, in every version of the story, I would hear your voice and come running. I would move heaven and earth to get to you. That is what love is, Flora. It is hearing someone call for help and saying, 'I am going to get you out of here,' and meaning it with everything you are." They walked back to where their children played, back to the family they had built from disaster and hope and stubborn determination. Behind them, the Rockslide site stood silent, a monument to the moment when two lives had collided and changed forever, when a cowboy had promised to save a woman buried beneath the stones, and in doing so had saved himself. Years passed in the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. William grew tall and strong like his father, learning to work the ranch while also showing an unexpected talent for business that would serve him well. Margaret became a skilled seamstress like her mother, but with artistic ambitions that led her to design pieces that were worn as far away as Portland and San Francisco. More children came, a second son they named Thomas, and another daughter they called Ruth after Owen's beloved sister. The ranch prospered, the shop flourished, and through it all, Owen and Flora remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days. They weathered the normal storms of life together. Difficult seasons, sick children, financial worries, the inevitable losses that come with time. Ruth's husband James passed away in 1889, and they brought Ruth to live with them, giving her the home she had once given Flora when she needed it most. On a warm June evening in 1898, exactly 20 years after the Rockslide, Owen and Flora sat on the porch of their much-expanded home, watching the sun set over the Oregon hills. Their children were grown now, building their own lives, but William and his wife lived in a house on the ranch property, and Margaret had taken over the dress shop completely, allowing Flora to finally retire. 20 years, Flora mused, her head resting on Owen's shoulder as it had done thousands of times before. Her dark hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her green eyes, but to Owen she was as beautiful as she had been at 21. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have lived 3 lifetimes together. "Best 20 years of my life," Owen said, his voice rougher than it had been in his youth but no less certain. "Best everything, really." "You are still the finest thing that ever happened to me, Flora Quade. Even counting the Rockslide," she teased gently. "Especially counting the Rockslide. That Rockslide brought you to me. I would thank it if I could." Flora laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Only you would be grateful for a natural disaster. I am grateful for everything that led me to you, disaster or otherwise." Owen pulled her closer, mindful of the aches that came with age but unwilling to sacrifice closeness for comfort. Do you remember what I said that day? When I first found you, you said you were going to get me out of there. And I meant it. But it turned out you got me out too, out of a life I did not even know was half lived until I met you. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Flora. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard drifting up to them, the smell of Ruth's cooking wafting through the open windows. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life, built moment by moment from a foundation of love and trust, and that first desperate promise made beneath a pile of rocks. "I love you," Flora said softly, "today and always, for every moment we have had and every moment still to come." "I love you too," Owen replied. "More than rocks, more than earth, more than anything in this world that could try to keep us apart." And there, in the peace of an Oregon evening, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together, Owen and Flora Quade held each other close and knew what they had always known since that fateful day in 1878. Some promises are more than words, some rescues are mutual, and some loves are strong enough to move mountains or, failing that, to survive being buried beneath them and emerge stronger for the experience. Their story became part of Oregon city legend, told and retold through the generations. The cowboy who heard a voice beneath the rocks and refused to give up. The seamstress who survived impossible odds and built an empire from nothing. The love that grew from disaster into something beautiful and lasting and true. And always, at the heart of the story, those simple words that had started it all. "I am going to get you out of here." It was a promise kept, a life saved, and a love story that would endure long after the Rockslide itself had faded into memory. A testament to the truth that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are simply the beginning of the best ones, if we are brave enough to reach for them and strong enough to hold on.